Today, our speaker needs no introduction. Laura Laban is the founder and CEO of Infinite Flight, the steam flight simulator development company for mobile platforms. She's going to talk about her experience founding Infinite Flight and some of the technical skills and challenges involved to build an impeccable flight sim. We're also going to have a small surprise at the end. Let me give you a hint, it's an airplane. Now, let me welcome Elizabeth, EAA Chapter 20's Young Eagles coordinator, to give an introduction of her group.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. EAA Chapter 20 is based at San Carlos Airport, and it's a very active community. And one of our goals is to nurture youths who are interested in aviation. We have two groups. We have Young Eagles, where we give free flights, but our events are on hold right now. And our second group is Young Aviators, and they are the ones who are sponsoring today's events. They're a group of teenagers who are passionate about aviation. They were originally formed 3 years ago to help build a Vans RV-12, along with other members of our community, which is now actually flying, which is great. And time to move on to the next build project. And they launched this online series last summer to help form community in these times where online is the place we're meeting. So I'd like to go ahead and turn it back to Anand, but I just wanted to set the scene for who we are and what we're doing.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Elizabeth. Now let's dig right in with the keynote. Welcome, Laura. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to present. I'm going to start the presenter screen thing, and I'm going to share. So I have a little presentation for you guys that I've put together to kind of illustrate what I'm saying with through pictures. Right, so present again. Oh, share screen. Okay. All right. Share screen. There you go. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so like Anand said, my name is Laura Ban. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Infinite Flight. We are the makers of the simulator by the same name. It's a simulator that runs on iOS and Android. And it started in, the first version was in 2011, but the story of the simulator dates back way earlier than just 2011. So I'm going to go through kind of like what my aviation path has been since the beginning, how I got into it, and the different little steps that took me to where I am today. All right, so I was born in France a long time ago, and I was introduced to aviation kind of organically. My family's not an aviation family. I don't have my father taking me on, plane trips every weekend. Would have been nice, but it wasn't the case. And I got into aviation because one day my brother came home with a copy of Microsoft Flight Sim. I think it was 5.1 a long time ago, and he actually never played it. I was the only one who was playing with it. It came with a thick booklet that explained how to do VOR navigation and DBs and all that stuff. And I found this super interesting. So I basically spent all my time playing with it when he would just let me have his computer for a little bit. And then I got my own computer in around 1997. And I installed Flight Sim 98 or maybe 95. And I realized that there was an SDK that we could create sceneries into the sim. I started making freeware scenery packages for the area around where I lived. And then one day, a gentleman from Switzerland contacted me, and he asked me if I wanted to collaborate with them to sell scenery packages for Microsoft Flight Sim. And so I agreed, and we sold a few copies of this. It was fun because it was like an actual box set, right? Like we could find it at the store. You could go to Best Buy kind of stores and actually buy a copy of it. And it got me enough income to get my pilot's license based on that the revenues that I got from selling those sceneries. So I went to the local airport and got some lessons. I started on the the Cessna 152, and then the flying club I was at tanked. So they basically asked everybody for $2,000, or they couldn't stay in the club, and I was young, I did not have $2,000. So I left the club and moved to a new one that didn't have Cessnas. They only had PA-28s and DR-400. And my instructor advised me to go to the PA-28. So I did all my the rest of my training on the PA-28. It was a 160 horsepower Cadet. And I got my license in 2001. Took me about a year to get the license. And it was fun. I like flying in this area because there's lots of mountains in the area. In Lyon, basically, Lyon is nearby Geneva, so it's in the southeast of France. So you have the Alps nearby. So we went on trips near the Mont Blanc. It was really beautiful. And then I moved to Paris after that to study engineering. And unfortunately, my aviation experience kind of went down because I could only fly when I went back to my parents' town, or when I joined a club in Paris, but it was so far away, and it took me 2 hours to even to just get to the airport. So it was kind of demotivating, and I didn't really fly much. I just flew a few times there, and the airspace around Paris is pretty horrendous. It's not an easy circles, like you can have in the US. It's just random garbage of class alpha everywhere with different altitudes everywhere. It's just it's difficult without a GPS. So it was kind of demotivating to fly at this time. And then so I went through 4 years of this engineering school, and I found an internship at NVIDIA in Santa Clara. So I moved to California. This is where I met Bruno, who introduced me to your fine group here. And we hung out a lot. And this picture of the 152 in formation, I think it was 150 in formation. I wasn't a 152, he wasn't a 150. And we flew in formation a lot, and had a lot of fun flying over Northern California. And he actually introduced me to tail dragger flying, because I think the first few times that I flew with him, he critiqued my technique a lot, and rightfully, because like I said, I hadn't flown a lot, and the environment was way different, and I was basically just flying DR-400s and Pipers, so not a lot of skill in terms of stick and rudder. So he told me you should really try to do some tail dragger flying, because this is more what real pilots do. And the impression that I had of tail dragger flying for me was, you just ground loop the plane and damage the wing and embarrass yourself. And he told me no, it's not that difficult, and it's rewarding, and to just at least try one time. So the first picture on the left is of an Aeroncast 7 DC. Belonged to instructor who's a Navy veteran out of Oakland. His name was Lou Fields, and he had me over for a flight in this plane. It's a 1940 something, no electrical system. Just the master switch was basically a little clip that you put on the battery and on the floor to start the transponder and the radio. You had to hand prop the plane, but it was a real flying experience. And to me, this was a game changer. I got hooked. Bruno was right, and I couldn't fly anything else afterwards. I went back to, I was a member of West Valley and Advantage Aviation in Palo Alto at the time, and they had a bunch of Cetabrias. So I got my checkout in a Cetabria in the 7 ECAs that they had. Was November 53823 for those who maybe remember. And I basically was flying just tail draggers. I got checked out in the Cessna 172s G1000, but I kept going out of currency because these planes were boring. It's just like flying a Camry. It's not fun. So I would rather fly a tail dragger. And then after a while, so what was it? In 2012-ish, I moved back to France for 6 months and then moved to Los Angeles after that. And I flew a little bit in LA. And they didn't have, I was a member of Justice Aviation, I think it was called. And they didn't have any tail draggers. It was just like Cessna 172s. And I flew a little bit there for a couple of years. And then we moved back to Northern California. And then I was still a member of Advantage Aviation. And but at that time, a friend of mine who works at Google, we actually got, like, I had my French license and I was flying in the US based on my French license. There's like a process of conversion of licenses. It's called a 6175. And as long as you maintain the other one valid, the US is valid. It's kind of convoluted, but it's pretty cool to get a license in another country pretty quickly. And but I didn't have my night rating in France. It's a special thing. You have to get a night rating in France, and I couldn't get the flying here and done on time because I was always coming back here in the winter, and flying at night in the winter in Paris is impossible. So I could never actually get the rating. So I went to I came back to the US, and then I actually got my US PPL in 2010. Because of, I didn't want to have to deal with all the European regulations and the French regulations and US regulations. This was actually easier. And the test that I did here in America was much easier. The one in France was 3 hours, and the guy literally tortured me, like crazy torture. It was great. It was nice, but it was torture. And in the US, it was just like 20 minutes. Just like we took off from Palo Alto, went halfway to Livermore, and then he was like, "Oh, I'm sick. Let's go to San Jose or something." And then we went back to Palo Alto. I think it was like half an hour, maybe less than that. So then this friend of mine who worked at Google, he also got his tailwheel endorsement, and we kind of discussed that we maybe should try to get a plane that we liked, to Citabria. And then he found a plane in Colorado, in just north of Denver, in Longmont, which is this plane, the red Citabria, which we purchased as a partnership. And then we flew it back from Colorado to California in two trips because the weather was not cooperative. It was super fun. The first picture is over the Golden Gate Bridge, and the second one is we took it in Page during the ferry back. It was just beautiful. This area was amazing. It was super fun. And for the story, this was in Page in the afternoon, and we had slept so bad the night before in Colorado that we thought we were going to stop in Page, but ended up going to Vegas because we thought for a cheap price we could get a 4-star hotel instead of a crummy motel in Page. So we just flew over the Grand Canyon a couple hours, and we're in Las Vegas. It was super fun. It was tiring, but super fun. And then so my story with Bruno kind of kept going, because in 2000 we kept flying together. We did formation in his plane and everything. But then in 2017, I decided to move to New York, and the friend that I was co-owning the plane with wanted to get an RV. And so he said, like, if you want to buy my share, you can take the plane to New York and, have fun with it over there. So Bruno and I took the plane, flew from Palo Alto to New York through a bunch of states in the middle. I forgot some of the Cedar cities or something. I forgot the ones. It was kind of blurry, but it was super fun to do that trip. And we ended up. So I did this trip 2 times, because then a couple years later I bought another plane and we had to do the trip another time. What's funny is that we ended up in Nashville the 2 times, which people tell me, like, why did you end up in Nashville from Palo Alto to New York City? Because the plan the 2 times was to stop in Oshkosh and kind of talk to friends and see to actually land there without all the craziness of Oshkosh. And but the weather was never cooperating with us, so we had to always go down south, and ended up 2 times in Nashville. And the next day we did Northern California and North Carolina, and then arrived. And so I flew for 3 years in New York. So 2 years with the Citabria, which was fun, because New York is actually, people think it's boring, but it's actually pretty fun. It's not as hilly as California, even though you can find some cool places. Um, there's lots of grass fields and tons of little fields, lots of restaurants. You can go on islands. You know, if you go up to Long Island Sound, there's Block Island, Martha's Vineyard. Very fun places to go, and you can also go to Canada. It's not far away. And so that picture of the Central Park is super fun. I would advise anyone who's flying in New York City to just try to do these one of those transitions because it was super fun. And then I kind of, so it was funny because I had read all the the documentation on how to do those transitions. There's one over the Hudson and one that goes over the East River, and then you can cross over Central Park. And then I could never find online, like I had read all the instructions, but sometimes there's some technicalities that you're not really sure. And then one day I wanted to do this East River and Central Park transition, and I was doing one of my favorite things is what Bruno told me one time is you can fly over Class Bravo, keep your transponder on, of course, and you can fly over to Class Bravo, and then you can basically be in places that you think you may not be able to be. So I did that in New York City. I flew so the Class Bravo was not that high. It's a 7.5, if I remember correctly. It was 7. So I was a little higher than this, and then I was tuning to Newark. I think it was Newark Approach or Newark Tide. There's like a special frequency to request this transition. And then I heard somebody in the frequency when I was flying south that asked this transition. And I figured it's a good idea. I'm just going to listen to what they're saying and say the same thing and ask for the same transition. And lo and behold, it actually worked. I went on the other side, went down to the Class Bravo, and asked Newark the same thing. And then I flew the East River and across the Central Park, and it's just crazy. It's flying over San Francisco is pretty fun. You're over the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's like, yeah, it's fun. But flying over New York City feels like it should be forbidden. Like you're like, it should be illegal. Why is this allowed to fly over the city like this? But it's on, you can't forget it. It's just amazing. And so the other pictures were actually, so in 2018, I went to Oshkosh and I saw at the Cub Crafters booth, they had their X Cub. So the X Cub is like, it's a Super Cub on steroids, basically. It's a brand new platform, a very powerful composite pop, glass cockpit, super fun to fly. And I thought, this is the plane that I need. Like the Citabria is great, but I'm kind of getting like, I need something a little more challenging than a Citabria. So I made an order for one with Cub Crafters, and then in 2019, took me a year and a half to get it, like because they had a long backlog. In 2019, I went over to Oregon to do the training, and they did the training at Hood River. Some of you may be familiar with them. It's TAC Aero. They're partners with Cub Crafters to do the initial training. So if you have a lot of experience, I forgot the number of hours. It's just a 3-hour training that you have to do with an instructor. Otherwise, it's a more like full-on transition, like 10 to more hours that you may need. So I just had to do 3 hours. We went to a field nearby, did some touch and goes to get a feel for the airplane, and then so Bruno came with me, and we wanted to fly together on the way back, but he had to leave earlier. So I ended up doing the return. So my plan for this was I had a conference in Florida around that time. It was in June of last year, and I figured like with Bruno, we can leave from Hood River and go directly to Florida. But it kind of started to read like like an NTSB report, like, the two pilots took off from an airport with a brand new airplane they had not experienced in, and they had to be somewhere at the other side of the country. So I kind of figured like it's not a good idea to do this, especially since I have to be at the conference in Florida. It was Flight Sim Expo, and we had a booth and everything, so I really couldn't skip it. And I didn't want to have to feel the pressure of pushing myself to, especially with the weather in Florida in June. So we ended up, what I did is the plan was to fly to Hayward, leave the plane in the hangar for a week. Then I went to Florida and came back. And then we flew the Cubcraft, the X-Cub, to New York a second time. And what was interesting is that this plane has autopilot, full Garmin G3X and G5 as a backup. The difference in fatigue that I got at the end of the day versus the Citabria, which had no bells and whistles. It was like not an old one, but it had no. The only tech was ForeFlight that we had in that plane. I wasn't tired at the end of the day in the X-Cub. Like we flew the same amount of hours, about the same amount of hours every day, but I wasn't exhausted. And the Citabria was completely wiped at the end. I couldn't do another hour. So that's a good thing to, if one day somebody's looking for a plane, having an autopilot is really helpful for those kinds of fatigue situations. And so we ended up flying across the country through Nashville, like I said, and it was super fun. Those flights, I have fond memories of them because it's a lot of planning, it's a lot of looking at the weather, not just for the day, but like for the next 3-4 days to see. Okay, we passed the Rockies. Now what do we do? Are we heading north? Are we heading south? What are the odds that we're going to get stuck in the north, in the south? And what's the weather in New York in like 3 days? What are the odds of, it was super fun. It's like playing some kind of multi-dimension chess game. It was super fun. And so we ended up doing it in just one less day than the Citabria, because we ended up getting stuck in Nashville. Not really. We got stuck in the 2 times we got stuck, North Carolina and Virginia. Because the weather in New York was that day was not good. So we could have skipped one extra day, one night in this area, but we couldn't do it. And it was super fun. And then we ended up, the photo at the bottom left, with Citabria in the back, which for the story was actually purchased back by my friend who worked at Google. He purchased the plane back from me and he flew it back to Palo Alto. So the plane's now back in Palo Alto, which is funny. And then, so some pictures of that second trip, you can see the horrible weather that we had. So there was no way for us to go north or south. It was basically just completely blocked either way. There was even like a PIREP that we got over Florida, where they mentioned somebody that was hurt because of some extreme turbulence that they encountered. And you can see this was, the second picture was over, I think after Salt Lake City, before we reached Cheyenne, Wyoming, which was an interesting place. So this is before the flights, before in Hayward with Bruno, before we got started. I just wish that I could relive that flight. It was just so amazing. And this is the X-Cub over New York City. Super fun transition. So now, where am I? Because obviously it's night for me. I decided to move back to France for a few years, to kind of get closer to family, and it's maybe not definitive, but for now we're here. And I actually took the plane with me, and I looked at different options to take the plane over across the ocean, and Bruno sent me a manual of the transition, like the whole flight, transatlantic flight from the US to Europe. And there's a section when they basically say, you're going to die. This is crazy. Don't do it. You're going to die. Here are the odds of surviving in water and blah, blah, blah. And it's if you get out of the plane in time and if your equipment survives and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of crossed that, off my list. Like, I'm not going to do that one. And the other option was to ask a ferry pilot. And both ferry pilots that I asked told me, nope, not doing that. Basically because of the performance. There's not enough. It can do it, but everything has to be absolutely perfect. Nothing has to fail. Weather has to be perfect, not change during the flight. And if there's too much of a tailwind and you have to go back, you're toast. There's no way you can get back. So I ended up putting it in a trailer. And this was in 2020, mind you. So worst year for that kind of stuff, because we moved in February, just before the pandemic. And I had plans to go back to New York to get the plane in a container in April, May. And April, May, we were on lockdown in France. Like, we couldn't go out for any reason, and travel was basically non-existent except for repatriation flights. So I couldn't do it. So a friend of mine actually took care of the plane when I was gone. And in July, he and a group of people that I hired took the plane apart, put the wings in a container, and so you can see it here, put the wings in a container, and the plane in a container, and the container came to Paris a month later in that big truck, and we ended up taking all the things off the aircraft, the container. So the wings were taken apart, the nose cone was off, most of the fairings were gone. We had to, the empennage also was taken off because otherwise they couldn't get into the container. So we had to put everything back together. This was a little stressful, taking it out of the container. We had this forklift that kind of lifted the plane out, and we had the truck move forward, so we didn't have to like move the plane, and it was stressful. So we eventually had it on the ground, and we could set it up. We could just like move it and have everything. And it was fun because I was super happy because I hadn't flown for like 6 months, and I missed my bird. And what's funny is, putting a plane back together is something that I had never done before. And so we took the maintenance manual, look at all the instruction on how to put the wing together, tons of stuff that I had no idea about, and something that I would, advise people if they have an option to just be there when a mechanic does some work, because it's amazing the type of stuff that you can learn. We even found some discrepancies in the AMM of Crab Crafters, because I believe we were the first ones to actually do this outside of their factory, because they had the procedure, but some of the stuff, like there was one torque value where we totally stripped the nut and the value was way off. So we had to call them and like, hey, are you sure of this value? And eventually, yeah, they gave us the right values, and we put the plane back together. For the story, in the picture in the left, the right, that Malibu in the back, I'm pretty sure every single one of you have seen that plane before. It's a plane that was in an LT surface, LT port, like one of those Courchevel type airports in France, and that came in too fast, too heavy, and then they ended up plowing the end of the runway in the snow. So yeah, fun times. So then we put the plane back together, put the fairings, did all the rigging, and then put some fuel in it, and then I was in the air. It was interesting, the first flight. So what was interesting in being there when the plane was being rebuilt was that in the first flight, I didn't really have any doubt that something was wrong, because I knew how each individual piece was put back together. Some of the safety mechanism, like some of those things have 2 safety pins. This one has carotid nuts. I learned so much of this stuff. It was super fun, and I was not worried when the first flight happened. I just did the first thing that I did is basically I lined up with the runway, took off, kind of wiggled the controls to see if things were okay, then landed again, taxied back, and took off for a little flight, and it was super fun. Like I just missed it so much, and I didn't. Turns out I didn't lose too much of the feeling of flying during those 6 months. Anyway, so that was my aviation story. Now I'm going to talk to you guys about what I do. So I work on this flight simulator called Infinite Flight. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's it runs on iOS and Android, and it's pretty fun because it doesn't require you to have a big computer, a big machine. especially with the new Microsoft Flight Sim, which takes like 10 to 15 minutes to get a flight started if you didn't make a mistake in the planning. So it runs on iOS and Android. We have more than 40 planes now with tons of liveries. We have different modes. One mode is in solo, where you can do whatever you want. We have time stretching and everything. We have multiplayer, which is, I think, the highlight of the sim, because you can be a pilot or a controller, and we have different server levels. So it's not like VATSIM or Ivo, where you're in one server, everybody's serious, and you're stressed out because if you do something wrong, somebody's going to yell at you. In our case, we have a server like this, which is called the expert server. But we have two servers, the kind of casual, where you can do whatever. You can race, 747s over Edwards if you want, and one that's more of a training one, which is more like you're encouraged to do things well, but it's more like to get a feeling of the sim. And then the expert will require certain level of experience and recurrency. And for the controllers, they're actually vetted. So we train them. They have written tests. They have practical tests. And they have to do a certain amount of hours. There's procedures. There's like a huge manual online that explains all the concepts. And for those who are interested in more like the procedures, you can talk to ground, tower, approach, departure, center. We have tons of real world information that we use to kind of get people to experience what it feels like to talk to different frequencies and sequence traffic, get sequenced into to an arrival to an airport. In terms of flight model, it's definitely not a game. So I work on a flight model, so that's my baby. So I'm going to defend it. But the way it's done is basically so if I talk to you guys about the way I started it, I was in school in Paris, and I was working on a game because we had a game section, and I was a member of a group there. And I was working on a physics engine for the game. So basically had a bunch of crates, and we could shoot at the crates. And but we used a library piece of code that did all the physics. And then in this library, there was an example code that had a little car. And then you could drive the car on a kind of like world with, ramps and a mock parking lot. And sometimes like you would have like the car driving, and then you hit on a ramp, and then you ended up with the car on its back. And there was a way to put a force on the side of the car to like flip it back. But if you pressed this button quickly enough, the car would like wobble and kind of go in the air. And this made me realize that what if I had the car and put some wings on the side and varied the force that I apply based on the speed, the angle of attack, and some lift curves. And lo and behold, this actually makes a plane. And this is how the whole thing got started. I changed the model, made it into a plane, and then, a lot of math later, Infinite Flight got born. So we actually have the physics engine is based on actual data. So we talk to pilots, we look at the flight manual, we look at usually I use for those who know the alternate speed values. So basically when you have unreliable airspeed, they give you some power setting and altitude setting with a certain flap setting. And it basically gives you what you should get in terms of speed and power. I use some of those items to configure the aircraft in approach and cruise, and usually it's pretty close to the numbers. We usually have between like 1% and 2% and one difference, a couple knot difference for the stall. So it's not study level, but it's definitely acceptable for a handheld simulator. We also have things like autopilot, so you can set up a flight plan, hit VNAV or LNAV, and it's going to follow your flight plan. We have lots of people flying on that, doing overnight, like 20-hour flights, super fun. We also have weight and balance. You can configure the aircraft, set, the fuel and the cargo and all that, and it changes the moment of inertia. If you put more fuel, it changes all these types of values that real planes actually are impacted with. Other features, we have a full-scale Earth model. We have satellite imagery for the entire world. So we did that before Microsoft. And it's 15 meter per pixel. So it's not Microsoft level, but we don't have their means. So it's what we could afford. So, but it's still pretty cool. Like when you look at this picture on the right, it looks pretty nice. It's pretty decent for a mobile flight sim. And actually, even for a PC sim, it would be pretty cool. Our sky and atmosphere rendering is pretty cool. Like we have time of day, and it's based on actual physical properties of light through atmosphere. We don't have clouds yet. We're working on that, but we have live weather. So when you're flying in multiplayer mode, your visibility, the winds, the gusts, and the turbulence are kind of matching the real world. And in terms of flight planning, we have SID stars and approaches. That's from NavBlue. It's a partner provider that we have. So they're an Airbus company. You can also do VOR navigation. So you can tune to a VOR if you don't practice that, and you don't want to get into the plane and you want to just do it before, in school or anywhere you are. You can just tune to a VOR and practice VOR navigation. We also have ForeFlight connection. So maybe some of you are familiar with the Stratus device. It's a little thing that you put in your plane that gives you the AHRS and ADS-B traffic and weather and all that. We actually send the same kind of packets that this device sends to ForeFlight. So when you're flying in multiplayer, you will see the traffic. You can see your attitude. We can share flight plans now. So it's pretty cool too. Whenever ForeFlight comes up with new features, you don't have to go in the airplane to try those features. You can just install ForeFlight and Infinite Flight, connect them, and then you can try those features. And we also have, since last year, live cockpits. So we don't have like an actual study level representation of the cockpit instruments, but we try to have most of the basic features, like here you can see the ground speed, tourist speed, and then you can see also the navigation panel, some of the engine settings as well. So it's pretty cool to just, have fun with a passion like this. Multiplayer, like I said, it's there's nothing to install. It's just there. You can just start playing it. We have these 3 servers. We can talk to ground. We also have ATIS. We also have DATIS now, so you can have the ATIS before you connect into the app. And you're pretty much guaranteed to have people 24/7. There's always somebody flying. We have enough controllers now that there's literally no time in the day where there's no controllers active. So it's pretty sweet. And one big aspect of the sim is the community. So from the beginning, we put the emphasis on having the community kind of steer and participate in the creation of the sim. It's pretty large. We have a forum where we have lots of discussion, lots of events planned by community members. We have fan groups who have been built, a very active virtual airline community with hundreds of members. We have they had to create like a regulatory board of VAs to make sure that things were kind of standard between all of them. So it's pretty fun, and we organize weekly events. There's 2 types of events. 3 types. There's like the kind of flash flights, which are like a quick flight for like an hour or 2 that we organize kind of like spontaneously. Our community manager, Misha, takes care of those flights. And we also have like more fun flash flights, which are like, let's race around an island in an F-18 or in a 747, just like on the casual server, and all have fun. It's just super fun to do those. There's like 100 people coming in, and we just race like crazy. It's super fun. And then we have every Friday, we have the Friday Night Flight, which is their flagship event, where we synchronize the schedule. So every day we have a different schedule. The ATC community manager takes care of planning a different region every day, where people usually fly overnight between each region. So we open different hubs. There's a different theme. Sometimes it's in Southeast Asia, and then the next day it's in Europe, and then the next day it's in South America. And on Friday we organize like a bigger place where people can hang out. We make sure that all the services are open, center, approach, all that, and it's really fun. And the advantage of this is that you can play anywhere. You don't have to be at your desk. You can just take your phone out of your pocket and then start playing. Yeah, that's pretty much it for my story. If you want to reach out to me, my Twitter and Instagram, it's at Laura Vitrix. So yeah, thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask.
Yeah. So, Laura, great presentation. It was fascinating to learn about your experience getting into aviation, the years of tiresome work to build such a platform. Now it's time for some Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat box. So we have a question from Grant. Where do we find these community events, community flights?
So the community flights are usually shared on our forum. So it's community.infiniteflight.com. It's a forum that we have an events section. Usually the weekly schedule and the Friday night flight are usually pinned at the top. So sometimes when I don't know where I want to fly, I will just go on the website on the forum, look at the first post, look at for the day. So on let's say is Saturday, where are people, and I look at the active hubs. So that's the way to find it. And there's also an events category where people can post their own events. So sometimes VAs have when there's a special airline that retires an aircraft, they're gonna organize a special flight just for that. Like when the 747 retired, some people drew stuff in the sky. It's pretty fun, pretty cool.
Yeah. Are there any planes slash liveries in Infinite Flight that are sentimental to you or other developers?
For me, it's the Air France because you think that's the country that I'm from. I like, it always gives me like this getting home feeling. I like the TBM 930. It's just my crush of a plane. It's just a cool plane. It flies super fast. You can land it short. It's just super fun.
Yeah. Big fan of Infinite Flight. How many employees do you have? Do you hire interns in summer?
So thank you. We have I think about 10 people working on the sim. In terms of developers, we are only 4 people. So we're not a big company, and we try to stay this way because the more people you bring in, sometimes it's a little harder to manage, especially since we're all remote. We've never actually had an office. Everybody's been remote from day one. And in terms of interns, we actually don't directly hire interns. There was one person that works with us now in the UK that joined because he started basic. We have an API and a developer system, like a way to connect to the simulator and get the status of the sim, send commands to the simulator, that type of stuff. And so some people have started building things around the simulator. And it's usually when people tell me, like, how do I join? I tell them, like, this is the best option. It's the best way. If you want to get it, closer to us, start building a project. So Cameron, who used to be an intern, he started a website called lifeflightapp.com. So it's basically like a FlightAware or Flight Radar 24 of Infinite Flight. So it's the same concept, but it shows the live traffic of Infinite Flight. And that got started because when we had this system of multiplayer, I wanted to have a way to see the traffic in real time. And I don't know web. This is not my thing. And everybody at the company knows it's not my thing. So I just made an entry, like a little access point to say, hey, if you want to get all the flights, you just call this URL and it's going to return all the flights that are happening right now. And you can call this other one that will give you the flight plans and everything. And then Cameron built an entire system based on that, and other people also did. And we actually now he's working with us. So that's the best way to get your foot into the door, is to build something based on the API.
Yeah. What is the latest planes that you're working on? If it's classified, that's okay.
So it's no longer classified. We talked about it last week. It's the 757. We've had the 757 since probably 2013 or 12. So it's been a long time. And it was a model that was getting dated. So now we've completely redone it from scratch. and we're trying to push it for this December update. So it's a tight schedule, and I've been flying it already. So it's fingers crossed. We'll try to make it. I think we should be good, but it's maybe tight.
Do you use Infinite Flight often?
Of course, yeah. It's my main sim. I don't use any other sim. I actually installed Microsoft Flight Sim, but I don't play it. You know, I know the graphics are better, and I actually don't play it. It feels like there's, for me at least, there's like a flight simulation fix that I need, and it's not about the graphics. It's the experience. It's the fact that you've had, my brain is satisfied. I've done some flying today, right? You know, like if you haven't flown for real or flown in the simulator for like a few days, you're like, I need it, I need it, I need it. And I could just fly in the sim. It's fine. You know, and flying with other people, it makes the flight super interesting. And that, I got that feeling. I remember back in like 1990 something, a flight simulator called Flight Unlimited 2 and 3. They had live traffic. Well, they had AI traffic, but which was super realistic. You could talk. It was not like a dumb thing where the plane would just, you know, do their own thing. You actually had air traffic control, approach, and tower. It was super fun, and it made every single flight different. And it's the same thing in Infinite Flight. When you go into the multiplayer mode, your flights are never the same because it's not at the same location. There's different, you know, problems that you have to solve every time. You know, like, oh, the approach is busy now, or the weather changed, or, you know, like I've got to, what am I, like, how is the approach going to manage me to get in, or the wind changed, now the runways change. So it's always like interesting. So yeah, so I usually just play Infinite Flight. There's only two things like games that I play. It's Infinite Flight and GTA whenever there's a new one. That's it.
When are you buying a real TPM 930 for comparison or research purposes?
I can open a crowdfunding. That thing is super expensive. I wish that I could get one, but it's just super expensive.
Yeah. What is your most memorable flight? Can be either in the flight sim or real life.
Oh yeah. There was one that yeah, it's probably the first flight, the first transition that I did, the first East River transition over in New York. I mean, there's a lot that are like really close to the top, like the whole flight, the whole transcontinental flights were just amazing, on like as a whole experience. But if it's like a one-shot experience, flying over New York City, and wanting time to stop, to really get a really, you know, feel it, because it goes by so quickly. You know, as you go up the East River and you cross, and it's like, oh, now I'm over the Hudson again, crossing north, and it's boring. You know, so yeah, that would be it.
What are your plans for upcoming releases? We have to jump over hoops to get a yoke to connect an iPad and then AirPlay to a TV monitor. Could you add that to your wish list?
I've been pleading a contact that I have at Apple for them to support standard USB devices. This is a huge bummer. They keep supporting those, you know, these things, but they never support joysticks. I had a hope with iOS 14 that they would finally do it, but they have no plans so far. We can hope that maybe with the new MacBook Pros that they're coming up with the M1, maybe if we run it on the Mac, they would allow us to use what's called IOKit to connect to the joystick. But I have low hopes. For now, I think unless somebody like Logitech or another bigger company makes an actual US Bluetooth joystick, I think it's going to be a pain. I wish they had a better system. That's why we have to use the third-party apps and all this stuff. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's how it is.
Yeah, so with the new M1 MacBook Pros, we'll be able to play Infinite Flight on Mac OS too.
Yeah. So we took like many other people because Apple enabled that by default to everybody,
Yeah.
which is like a little pushy. So we took it out because what are you gonna do? Like you can't. There's probably an accelerometer in the Mac. Like you're not gonna play like this. It doesn't make any sense. So we took it out. We may try to see if it's actually viable. But yeah, for now it's what we have to deal with.
Is there any chance that Concord will be in the mix?
So we actually did mention Concord. We had a model a long time ago, but it was contracted to a team that wasn't great. It did not look like the standards that we wanted, so we ended up scraping the project. And now that the standards for cockpits are much higher, um, there's no retrofit package available for the Concorde for a glass cockpit. Uh, and physical cockpits, like physical gauges and needles, they take a long time to code. Uh, and there's so many in the Concorde that, we kind of put this one aside for now. I wish we could do it, but it's a lot of work. Yeah.
So,
So for now.
what languages do you use? Do you use C Sharp and Unity, or
We don't use Unity. We use C Sharp, and the graphics engine is Monogame. It's a heavily modified version of Monogame for our purposes. But yeah, it's in C Sharp. So we have it running on PC and iOS and Android. So PC builds are only for development purposes, but we have Android and iOS basically are cross compiled with a tool from Microsoft called Xamarin. So yeah, so it's all in C Sharp.
uh, the price for a pro subscription is quite high. Considering income, revenue, and other mobile flight simulators, is there a possibility for you to lower the price?
Possibly. I mean, there's it's we have to go with the time. Now it's pandemic time. Everything is in pandemonium, so we may consider it. I think having a suggestion on the forum could be one the first step. Um, but we're trying to grow, and there's always it's a niche market. What people have to understand is that it's a niche market. It's not like it's a game that's going to be sold millions of copies with the backing of a huge editor like Ubisoft or even Microsoft. So there's less volume sold, so obviously the price has to be a little higher. But we're thinking about other options, maybe like a shorter duration of subscription, maybe having one with just the airplanes, with just the scenery and not the multiplayer. Yeah, we've been thinking about those.
Can you summarize the process of developing slash reworking an aircraft? What are the main steps?
So for rework, like let's say for the 757, so what I did is usually I go, well, if it's a plane we've already done, I usually go by the flight model that we used to have. So when the artists are done with the model, they send it over to me. Then I import it in the sim and see what happens. Usually it's, like some things don't work right. The weight and balance is a little off. So what I usually do is I look at the flight manuals and try to configure all the weights. um, what usually helps for that is finding a weight and balance sheet where I can find at empty weight the weight distribution for all the tires. That's a great way for me to tell where the center of gravity is, and how the basic behavior of the plane is based on the default weights on the airplane. Um, and then I take it for a test flight. I usually set some of the areas for the wings, some of the lift curves. I try to get it from the NICAP profiles that I can find, and usually we're pretty close to what we should be getting. There's some The only part that takes some time to tune is the drag values, because that's chaotic, and I don't think a lot of simulators actually properly compute drag, uh, because it would take a huge computer system to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you reminisce the past almost 8 years at Infinite Flight, what's your most valued achievement and most critical obstacle?
The valued achievement, it's I would say it's global. when we went from small regions to the entire world. The challenges that this brought were like crazy, and it felt like a mountain that we could never be able to climb. And Philippe, my co-founder, we co-founded the project. Like I worked on this project on my own, and then we joined the forces in 2009-10, and then we ended up working on that. And then it was such a daunting task that I told him, like, listen, give me a planetary model, and then once you have this, just import it in the sim where everything is broken, and I'll figure out how the physics will work around this new system. And if it would have been helpful if the Earth was actually flat, because the fact that it's not is really painful. Lots of math. You can't just make assumptions on like, y is up. No, y is not up anymore. So you have to always some of the transformation of reference and frames, because the physics engine is in a way we can't run it at the same scale as the planet because of floating point. It's technical gibberish, but like it's the precision of some of the numbers. It doesn't work on a planetary scale, so we have to simulate it in a different space and then transform it into the actual space of the Earth, and that's just destroys your brain, because it's something you can't really see, and sometimes when trying to debug something you can't see, and the visualization is not exactly right. Is the visualization wrong, or is the simulation wrong? It's really painful.
What were the hardest obstacles to launch the company?
I think if it's before, it would be like to actually get the courage to actually do it, because it's really scary to get from the point where you're working at a big company and it's comfortable, and there's the salary comes every month, and to actually like, okay, I'm gonna quit my job and actually do it full time, and like life circumstances got me to quit my job before the app was even out. So it was interesting discussions with like my parents, for example, were like, what are you gonna do if it doesn't work? I'm like, well, it's gonna work. What if it doesn't work? Like, we'll figure it out. What do you mean you'll figure it out? Like, yeah. So it was I think it was the most difficult part, like on a personal level. And it's a whole bunch of like difficult, like it's creating a company is a roller coaster of emotions, because like competition comes in, they do something better than you do, and then you're like, but we're focused on something different, but this thing we do better than them, but this thing they do better than us. And it's like staying the course and not being discouraged by just we're all humans, right? So sometimes we get discouraged, and that's one of the biggest, like the human aspect of building a company is difficult.
Are the beta releases open to developers to use on a PC?
What was the question exactly?
Are the beta releases open to developers to use on a PC?
Oh, no. So the betas are still on device. The only people who have access to the PC version are developers and some of the staff members when they have to use some of the features that are difficult to use on mobile. So for some video shots or some tricky little things that we have to do, we have to use PC for that. Yeah, we know there's a demand for the PC version. It's just for now we just prefer to focus on the mobile versions. Yeah.
Do you use AWS or Azure servers for?
So we used to use AWS, but we don't anymore. We switched to Azure, and now we're a mix of Azure and another provider that's not as well known.
Where do you get the satellite data from, and what's the cost?
The cost the cost is a lot of money. And we made the decision to do that because we've grown to be scared of third party SDKs or companies, because if you use an online service that depends on somebody else, like we could have used Mapbox, for example. But if you use Mapbox and for some reason, Apple acquires them or Microsoft acquires them, they're going to shut down the project, or they're going to change the API every couple of months and then deprecate things all the time. We have this issue with the Facebook SDK for logging in, which we're trying to get rid of. So we thought like acquiring the imagery is the best way for us to be self-sustained and not have use our own CDN. So if we one day want to move to a different CDN provider, we can do that, no problem. So this is what we did. We acquired the imagery, and it cost a lot of money. It was a big investment. But yeah, so we get it from a provider that actually curates the imagery, because we can't people just think you can use Google Maps data or you can use Mapbox or whatever, but it's not guaranteed that the imagery is going to look nice, because sometimes with different levels, the color is different. Sometimes, maybe you've seen in the Bay Area, there's bending over the water. It looks terrible. Sometimes there's clouds. Sometimes it's taken at different times of days. And what this provider does is that they curate the pictures of the entire world. They try to find matching images. They color correct it. They try to remove all the clouds, find versions that don't have clouds. So it's a lot of work. So that's we get out from this company. Yeah.
Laura, thank you for taking the time out for an amazing presentation.
Well,
to everyone else, go get Infinite Flight. It's an awesome flight simulator. At the EAA, we have a plethora of opportunities available for people of all ages to avail. A few of these include scholarships, building planes, and mentoring. Please shoot us an email at youngaviators@eaa20.org to learn more. Lastly, to keep updated with Young Aviators, follow our Instagram at YoungAviators1 and our YouTube channel at tinyrl.com/YoungAviators3. Our next event will be next Saturday, so a week from today at 10:30 a.m. on a Stanford Mechanical Engineering students experience. It's going to be awesome and hope to see you there. Now it's time for the surprise. Let me hand it over to Bruno to display the C-Ray.
Yeah, and all right, let me try to show you what the C-Ray looks like at this point. Give me a second. Oh, yeah. I'm right here. So this is the progress that we have since we moved out of San Carlos. The frame is inside the hull. And we are currently working on the heater that is going to go right here. Oh, you won't be able to see. Right at the bottom right here. And then the fuel system is pretty much in place and ready to go to the engine. We tested the fuel pumps that are right behind and they are working. And now we started some of the electrical work. You can see all the wires here that we have to create. So there is, unlike the RV12, there is no plans for the electrical. So we have to do everything ourselves. So that's where we are. Any questions?
Yeah, put them in the chat box if you have any questions.
And you can see the group working in the back.
Alexander asked, when can we come see the build?
You can come any Saturday. We are here from 9 a.m. usually to 4 p.m. We're in Hayward.
And Laura asked, when is the maiden flight?
Good question. We wanted to make it for Oshkosh 2021, but that's going to be tight.
What type of plane is it?
Say again?
Anand asked, what type of plane is it?
What type of plane? It is an amphibious. So it's a plane that can land on the water. That's why if you look at the bottom, it looks like a boat. And right now you don't see them, but there is gear legs that's going to come out from the sides here. And it can retract when you're underwater or can come down when you land. And the third landing gear, in this case, is a classic airplane, the tail wheel. So the tail wheel is here and is retractable also.